Hello, Tom, and hello, everyone, and welcome to our Human Needs podcast with Elite Mind. And those are our weekly live conversations where we discuss a variety of insights from organizational well-being industry and give you tools, knowledge, tips to make our workplaces a little bit more human. And this week we have a very special guest, Thom Dennis. So, Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelina.
And
So nice to be with you.
really, really glad to have you here. And this topic that we're addressing today is the role of the board in employee well-being. And we find in our work that there's a lot of disconnect and confusion about, how what is the role that the board plays in shaping companies' culture and vision and mission and strategy. And HR is often struggling to meet some of these demands and expectations in order to have even a buy-in at the board level for some of our initiatives and approaches. And there's this huge disconnect and friction very often that's created in organizations just by the lack of this awareness of what has the board got to do with well-being. And Tom has wealth of experience coaching executives, directors, also as a non-executive director himself in many companies. He has an insight in some of these conflicts and relationships between the board and the C-suite, and how those relational dynamics then shape culture and well-being. So I thought, who could be the better person to invite for this conversation? Because I think as coaches, we have a privilege of sometimes hearing a lot of those insights that do stay behind the closed doors, and people open up about their personal struggles and experiences, and maybe some of those insights would be interesting for us to share and discuss and share our experiences, what we are observing and what's working so far, what doesn't, and how we can influence well-being all the way from the board and through the board. So yeah, Tom, maybe, just to start with the very, basic question, first of all, is what is even the role of the board, right? I think not everyone really even understands who is at the board, why they are there, and why it's needed. So let's just start with a very basic overview of that.
Well, yeah, thanks, Evelina. I think part of this is dependent on the size of the organization. There are a lot of businesses, companies, where the board consists largely or sometimes entirely of people who are in the C-suite, the senior management. And one of their challenges is to, when they meet, is to sort of take off their head of HR or head of IT or head of production, whatever it is, hat, and go in and discuss the functioning of the business from a broad viewpoint. In large organizations, you might have the CEO who's on the board, and everybody else is different. And then you will be sort of coming across NEDs, what they call a NED, a non-executive director, people who are brought in to bring an independent viewpoint. So it does depend on the size of the organization. But fundamentally, the role of the board is to establish the vision, the mission, and the values of the business. It's to set the strategy and the structure of the organization. It's to delegate to the management team the tasks that they feel are required. And it's to be the the body that's accountable to shareholders, and the sort of the external stakeholders for the functioning of the business. So, I mean, those are the sort of the fundamentals, and I don't think any two boards are the same. You know, and the way that they function is the same. You know, if you've got family-run organizations, for instance, then you've got all the family dynamics that are overlaid, and they can be extremely complex. And it depends on the characters on the board, how much freedom they want to give the executive team. So every organization is different.
Yeah, absolutely. I find I've heard someone saying recently that, you know, the role of the board is really choose what game company should be playing in the market, you know, by what rules we want to play the game and how exactly we win, right? So I think this is kind of more from kind of competition and market perspective. I quite like that metaphor because it's really, you know, this kind of overall long-term direction to say like how exactly we choose to operate in this world, in this economy, in this market. You know, what are all of these influences shaping our direction as a company, and how exactly we choose to navigate that, right? And I think with that there comes this huge responsibility to, like you already said, to shareholders and you know, owners of the business, investors, but also the internal stakeholders. And some of those internal stakeholders as well are people, our employees, right? They are also responsible making sure that they do the right for them as well. And I think I know we've discussed this, you know, a while ago. We've discussed this before, that there's a huge change in the priorities of the board. And again, some of it escalated by the pandemic, but just in general with economic climate and you know, increasing mental health crises and so on. Few years ago, it was still quite rare to have well-being as one of the top priorities at the board level, right? But now it becomes one of those biggest priorities, really. How do you really maintain the well-being of your employees, and sometimes even of your clients and your customers as well, if depending on the structure and kind of the goals and mission of the organization. So what would you say about, you know, this perspective? What is the current board's perspective on well-being, and what are some of these challenges associated with that?
Well, it does depend on the board. My goodness. And I don't think it's just about well-being, actually, to set the scene, because I often say that, you know, in the old days, what happened in the corporate world tended to drive what happened in society. And I think today it's very much the other way around. Society has moved on in many ways, and the corporate world is playing catch up. And so it's not just about well-being. You know, we used to talk about DEI, but more and more people are now talking about DEIB, diversity, equity, rather than equality, by the way, inclusion and belonging. And all the issues that I think an awful lot of this, I was very struck when George Floyd was murdered in the US, how that really opened up a conversation about Black Lives Matter. And I suppose before that, we'd had the Weinstein scandal, which aroused this very strong feeling of hashtag Me Too. And you know, I think an awful lot of boards sort of look at these things and they say, I, I mean, not
What
least
do we
because
do with it? Yeah.
there's an age gap. And, I remember being phoned several times after the George Floyd case. And people were saying, "Oh, can you do something about racial justice?" Or and it's like, "Oh, this seems to be an issue. Can we get a tick in the box, by addressing this?" And the fundamental is that it doesn't work like that. What is required of the board today is guidance to the senior management on tackling all the social issues that are now really bubbling away very strongly. And one day it'll be this, and one day it'll be that. And that's why it's so important to go back to what I call a systemic view of the whole of the organization and how it fits into society and what is their role beyond just being this island of a business, how it fits into society, how it fits into the local community. And then, of course, you've got the ESG sort of lens that boards have to look at as well. So how much are boards really engaging with this? And how much are they employing old ideas, old skills to a situation which is really dynamic and is moving forward very, very fast? And so I think, getting back to well-being, there is this sort of question hanging over the board in that case is how much responsibility do you hold as the arbiters and the drivers of the overall strategy of the business? How much responsibility do you have for the well-being of the employees of the business? And I think you'll find that some boards find this honestly a distraction. And other boards are really taking it very seriously. Hallelujah. But, you only need to look at the gender pay gap and how long that has been law, that men and women, just taking that as a frame, are supposed to be paid the same for doing the same work. And yet they're not. They're still not. And it's been in law for a long time. And that's a board responsibility, but it's not being picked up in so many businesses. So it's like the financial imperative and the need to satisfy shareholders is such a strong drive that there's a dissonance between the management who feel I'm beholden to the shareholders. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to do the monthly returns. I've got to do the quarterly returns. And I remember coaching a CEO a while back. I don't know what time of the year it was, probably October or something. And he was the third CEO that year.
Oh, wow.
And, you think of the government and, how they turn over prime ministers. It was kind of the same. But this guy was terrified. And he was trying to pull the business together and take it forward. And he felt this great weight from the board on him to perform. And, we had a conversation and I said to him, look, you're going to have to manage the board here. You're going to have to manage upwards because you've got some really fundamentals to put in place to get this business back onto an even keel. And if you're so terrified about being fired, you're never going to make the right decisions. And who suffers at the end? It's the man on the shop floor, man, woman, sorry, but it's the people who just go to work every day and do the best that they can, and they feel like they're little pawns in a game that's being played somewhere up in the clouds, and they don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important for us to have these open, frank conversations. And, thank you for sharing those experiences. And I think what is also very important is that you are highlighting these all kind of societal pressures, right? Because before, it was more of a financial pressure, right? And more kind of governance, legal responsibilities of what are, maybe regulatory requirements that, we have to provide, how we deliver the best, shareholder returns. But now there's all of these additional societal pressures. And again, there is also these kind of human needs at play as well, right? At the end of the day, these C-suite executives, they are human. The board members, they're also human, right? They're also scared. They are also acting with different external pressures and their own, different fears and insecurities. And it's so important that we don't just look at them as, some impersonal machines who are pulling the strings on the rest of the organization. They're human. And therefore, if we do want to make an influence in organization, if we do want to change the culture, if we want to change the way we operate, if we want to kind of adjust some of that strategic direction, we have to address those human challenges as well, right? And absolutely, we cannot turn a blind eye on some of these top-down driven goals and criteria of, again, I think, what we choose to measure in organization shapes everything. Probably it's the most important thing, right? And it's the board that decides what matters and what company should measure, right? If we choose to measure profit, if we choose to measure, retention, if we choose to measure employee happiness, if we choose to measure, I don't know, new client accounts that we've onboarded this year, what is the success measure of this long-term game that have we decided to play, will then have a direct impact on company's culture, right? Because it will trickle down on the expectations from the executives to the middle managers on what is expected of you to do here today. And then those pressures, again, like you say, trickle down all the way to people on the shop floor, on the ground, on, whatever that is, environment that you're operating in. So it's so important that, those pressures, they're not taken from ether, right? They actually come all the way from the board. And unless we understand what those pressures are and how exactly the board and executive team came up to make those decisions and to measure those specific things, then we cannot manage upwards. We cannot really influence the change. And we are always, being just this little, pawn in the game, right? So how do we do this better? How can we really have a better understanding of company strategic direction and vision? And how can we really play the game in a way that we can influence upwards, but also that people at the top make right decisions that really stand by people and do best for them?
That's a big question you've asked.
Well, of course, no pressure, Thom. Of course, so easy. Yeah.
So, first I'd like to sort of preface that by sort of highlighting that there was a recent EY study that came up and said that 70% of executives today in large organizations are looking for a less stressful job. Now, that's not a small thing. And you look at all what's going on. Let's take this right above the board. What's happening in the world today. The level of uncertainty and the need to set strategy in an environment where you don't know what's going to happen. You look at what's happening in the Middle East, you look what's happening in Ukraine, the uncertainty with the way that China is reaching out into the world, the fact that there are, how many is it? It's either 32 or 52, but I think let's say there's 32 active wars going on at the moment in the world, and some of them are just sort of local fights, if you like, but an awful lot of them are around, for instance, raw materials. How are we going to make enough batteries for all these electric cars that we want to have on the road? There are demands, and even the pandemic and the effect on supply chains. It's not over, and so at a board level and in the executive suite, there are all these uncertainties and pressures, and you look at boards. I don't know what the percentage is, but there's an awful lot of members of boards who are on several boards, which from one point of view is great because they bring experience. I mean, I always encourage a CEO to become a non-exec director on a different business because you bring that experience. It's a two-way thing of learning, which is fantastic. But it's not like they've got plenty of time on their hands, most of these people. And so they are under enormous pressure. And I think sometimes now a lot of board members actually should be stepping down because they're using old learning and applying it to new circumstances. And in too many, they're too split, which really doesn't help. So I think that people they look up at there's one word that came up for me as you were asking that question, and that's transparency. And I think there is an enormous amount of there's a great deal of increased demand for transparency. I'm supposed to be writing a very short article on my predictions for 2024 in the corporate world, and I find it very difficult to find actually that many positive things to say, and it's fascinating. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I mean, I was listening to the Reith lecture, the BBC Reith lecture, the first one, where the Professor Ben, can't remember his name, was one of the questions that he was asked was, you talk about democracy around the world. Can you give an example of one country that is being managed or ruled well, governed well right now? And he couldn't. And it's like, these are our role models. These are the people at the top of countries. And it's like, I think for a lot of organizations, there are fantastic leaders, really brilliant people with fantastically good intention and really want to bring about positive change in the way that they're doing it. And it would be wonderful to have some forums where they can share their learning, and there probably are things like that. But I think we've got to learn from the positives, and one of them is unquestionably being more transparent. I think it's much easier to say, no, you don't need to know that, or no, we can't tell you because, and they think up a reason, because it's much harder to be transparent and reveal some of the struggles that are going on at the top of an organization. And some leaders might say, my job is to protect you from that. I don't want you to see what's going on in the C-suite between us and the board, because you've just got your job to do. But But that sort of mentality then filters down into the organization, so that, for instance, typically when the C-suite has a great idea and they want to pass it down as an initiative, it's the level below them and probably the level below that who hear this and they say, oh, for goodness sake, it's another initiative. Look, let's just keep your head down, and in 6 months it will have gone away, and we'll have another bright spark up there who's coming up with another bright idea. And so what that does is to create this blockage between good ideas coming down and bad news and that going up. Yeah. So we've got to open up. It's not just the C-suite have got to set an example and say, look, as Alan Sugar said years ago, bring me the bad news as fast as you can, because then they can do something about it. But so many people are fearful. And I think leadership has got to acknowledge that there is fear so often in businesses. You could say it's irrational. I'm not going to fire you. I've never even thought of firing you. But the people lower down, particularly in this world where we're under such stress because of the cost of living crisis and everything, there's so much fear. And we've got to work with that, and we've got to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and also I think because we're operating in such uncertain environment, people already kind of, fighting crisis in their everyday jobs every day, right? And now you start to bring on some new initiatives of let's change this, let's do this, let's do that. Unless we really have this complete honesty and transparency about why exactly is this important and what exactly is this going to do for you, for the business, for the long-term sustainability of the organization, and how you can be part of that journey, then people are not invested in going on that journey, right? Because you see that as an additional, obstacle, as an additional thing to do in your busy life and your busy work and your busy schedules. And I'm just so glad that you are pointing out the importance of this, transparency and kind of these feedback loops, and especially, highlighting some of these kind of bad news. And from the work that we do, again, for those who are maybe less aware of the processes and how we work, is that we go to organizations to help them to discover people's needs at work, human needs at work. Mm-hmm. And we create these insights where we first look at the state of individual health, individual well-being at the collective level. And we look at to what degree this organization is meeting those people's needs through their strategy, through their policy, through their culture, through their ways of working, through their leadership, right? Through their communication and alignment. And we see this all the time, that the biggest misalignment is from the top down and from the bottom up, right? This vertical alignment, right? That people at the bottom have no understanding of the overall strategic direction of the business, because like you say, some people at the top like, oh, you don't need to know that. And then that means that people are demotivated. They don't see their role and the purpose in that workplace. But also there's no feedback loops to feed anything upwards, right? So people are scared of challenging upwards, of managing even upwards, of sharing honestly some of their struggles and experiences. And it creates this disconnect that leaders, the board, the C-suite, they actually operate their business and they lead their entire strategy based on assumptions, biases, misinformation and some gossip of what they think that people need and what they think company needs, but not what they really do. Mm-hmm. And there is also, I think, you mentioned that fear. I think there is also a huge level of fear from senior leaders and the board of knowing the truth, because there is a level of safety in operating in your own little bubble, and you think, well, everything's good and everything's great and we've been operating like this for 20 years, so it worked for us. And it's those companies who actually fail to adapt because they fail to respond in the changing environment and changing people's needs. Now, think how much change we have experienced just over the last 2-3 years, right? The pandemic, the changing ways of working, the changing expectations about health and well-being, the changing people's boundaries between work and life, the economic pressures, political pressures, all of the international conflict, all of the, racial inequality, gender conflicts, all of that are adding so much pressure. And yet there are people at the top who choose to close their eyes and close their ears and operate in exactly the same way from their own comfort zone. And that becomes a huge obstacle for innovation, for culture change, for making the business more resilient and adaptive to that. I love the quote by Charles Darwin, who said that it's not the strongest nor the most intelligent that survive, but the one that is most adapted to change. And even though that is said about individuals and the whole kind of evolutionary adaptation, I think it's so true for the businesses as well, right? And it's those businesses who, um, maybe have a lot of wealth of experience and knowledge and resources, but they have actually changed to respond to this kind of changing social demands and all of that kind of systemic expectations. They haven't survived, right? And those who still survived but hanging on to those old ways of doing things, they are the ones that are struggling the most. And they're the ones that have the biggest pressure and the highest stresses in the organization on people's everyday ways of working and living, right?
It's something that is it's such it's a wonderful feeling when you get a phone call from somebody who is in exactly as you're describing, and they say, I think we need some help.
Yeah. 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 But
And then
how often it happens also, Thom, that, we are being called in and they say we need some help, but then we are given all the rules, boundaries, and the little box in which we are allowed to operate. And how many leaders are actually really comfortable hearing the uncomfortable? How many of them are truly, honestly open to hear the truth, and to then again do something about it, right? So going back to the transparency, going back to communication, going back to the alignment, going back to being true to your vision and mission of the organization, and what does the company stands for, and the values, and how do you really live those principles every day, right? There's so many things that actually stop people from truly honestly doing that role to their best potential. And it's so important that when we present some of our well-being initiatives, culture change initiatives, mental health support initiatives, that they are presented upwards with awareness of those huge challenges and pressures that the board are experiencing, right?
Yeah. Yes. um, the average age of a business, the length of the life of a business is coming down and down and down. And I mean, I think 15 years ago it was sort of 60 years, and now it's about 12. And this is a reflection of so many things that are going on. And I think it's very interesting. I have worked with a lot of C-suites, still do, and coached a lot of CEOs, still do. And one of the sort of paradoxes is that very often an organization is created by someone at almost the same time as they have children.
How interesting.
And as the children are then agitating to leave home, sort of 17, 18, and even if they're not agitating, because there's more and more kids that are living with their parents sort of into their late 20s now because of the way society has gone. But just letting them go, letting them go to university and all that. And all of a sudden, those kids are not in the home at the same time. And there's this sort of vacuum that is created at home. It's also the same moment for those people to really think seriously about letting go of their organization and to hand it on to people who can take it to the next level. And it's quite interesting, this sort of struggle. So I've lost my children. What do I do now? And so many people's identity is tied up with the way that they see themselves as essential, indispensable for the running of the business. Where actually that is the moment to say, how can I let go? How can I? Just like I'm letting go of my children into the world, how do I let go of my business into the world? And it causes a lot of distress.
Yeah, and I think with that comes a lot of struggle for kind of power and control, right? We kind of hold on to that power. We try to kind of micromanage and have control of things that are not in our control, right? And very often, especially for the founders, business is the extension of their identities, right? So it is very difficult to let it go, but unless we're able to do that, the business can never outgrow our own internal fears, limitations, experiences, and so on. So it is so important to kind of enable and empower other people to do their best work, to feel their best, to deliver the next stage of innovation and change. And instead of controlling and regulating that, what are the best ways of enabling that culture to happen? And I think definitely that comes from this individual sense of your own identity and your own security and being able to let go, which comes with a lot of psychological baggage often as well. And there is a lot of kind of psychological games that are being played at the board level, right? But yeah, it is so crucial to understand that the impact of what we choose to hold on to and what we need to let go of, and again what we choose to measure as our success, right? And what I really like is looking at the time frames for which we choose our success criteria. And I think we should definitely measure our success in the longest term possible, because that what gives us much more kind of reward and fulfillment. And if you think like, what is the success of this organization in terms of next month or next quarter, then of course you are most likely looking at your shareholder returns and your bottom line, and maybe employee retention or engagement or some of these kind of like really narrow-minded KPIs. But if I was to ask someone a question like, how does the success of your organization look like for the next generation? Now we are looking at long-term sustainability of the business. Now we are looking at the resilience of this business to survive in face of all of these societal changes and shifts and all of the economic pressures that are happening right now and shaping that market, right? And if we really keep our eyes on that long-term goal, it actually creates a lot of freedom to operate. It allows us to let go of some of those small things that we are holding on to, of these kind of perceived securities, right? And that has a huge impact on culture, on innovation, on people's ability to really look at how can I contribute to this long-term sustainability of this company. And each person then can become an asset to the business. And we see these terms all the time, right? Like, people are our biggest assets. but are they really, right? Because they are only assets if they are their best and if they are invested fully in building the long-term sustainability of the business, right? On the other hand, you can look at people as your liability. If people are ill, if you have huge turnover, if you have very poor performance, if you have people making these human error mistakes that are incredibly costly to the business and sometimes even to the environment, to the economy. You look at some of the natural disasters that are most likely caused by the human error, too much stress, lack of safeguarding, and so on. And you look at those two extremes and you think, like, what is, how do we move the needle, and what is the role of the board in that? And I think it's really all about what we choose to measure and how exactly we choose to then navigate, the rules of the game of how we play. And yet most companies are somewhere at the middle, right? Where it's neither that bad, neither good, but it's this kind of tit for tat relationship where, company looks like, what's the most that I can get out of employees by giving them the least? And employees are looking the same, right? What's the most I can get out of this organization by working less and more flexibly and having better life, right? So it's really a lot of these kind of societal expectations and dynamics that are shaping our ways of working. And we really need to look above and beyond that and look at this kind of long-term picture of human sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability, and how can we really empower, enable, educate, equip your employees to build that sustainable organization. And it comes with a lot of trust and ability to let go of short KPIs and measures of what needs to happen tomorrow.
Yes. Yes. I'm sort of reflecting on some of the pressures upwards that we've been experiencing in the last sort of year or two, where employees are increasingly asking, what is the purpose of this business? And what is our role in society? And for the increasing numbers who are climate conscious, are asking their management, and through that to the board, what are we doing? What's our level of responsibility for how we're using resources? And how can we have as part of our purpose to actually, in our own way, make a difference to positively impact the world, as opposed to us just taking natural resources and using them as part of a conveyor belt where we're sucking the goodness out of the earth and not returning anything. And I think for a lot of boards and leadership, they say, "Oh, look, for goodness sake, it's just not our job. Our job is to make this widget and get it out and do it as efficiently and as profitably as possible." So that there is this pressure that's going on. But we're talking about well-being fundamentally, and I think that there is no question when employees feel like they are part of something that is greater than themselves, and that they can identify with and feel like it has worth, then there's less sickness, there's less absenteeism, there's more creativity, there's more innovation, there's all these positives that come out when people just feel like they're part of something that they can believe in. And so we say, what's the role of the board in employee well-being? Give them the give the employees a sense of worth.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think such an important piece of such important message, right? And we just get lost in all of these kind of little struggles of why people are leaving, why they're sick, what's causing their stresses and so on, but we fail to look at the big picture of what is it exactly that keeps us well, what is it exactly that gives us that meaning and purpose, and actually makes us want to be part of this company, specifically this mission, specifically that journey, and know very clear role and responsibility in how exactly I am being part of making that happen, right? And it's not that senior leaders, managers are somehow more important on that mission. Far from it. Everybody plays their role, and obviously, as you know, this example of NASA and cleaner telling Kennedy or whoever was visiting, what are you doing here? And cleaner said that I'm helping to take the man on the moon. I think, again, it's such a kind of overused example, but I think it is still a very good example of demonstrating that it is actually possible for every person to feel like they are something bigger, part of something bigger. They are contributing to that bigger goal. And that's exactly what keeps people engaged, what keeps them motivated, what keeps them willing to negotiate their contract with employers on different terms, and make company much more agile in achieving the goals in whatever way that it takes, right? And yeah, it's so important to kind of build that resilience both at individual level but also at that organizational level. And resilience is not staying strong in face of everything. It's sometimes quite the opposite. It's being able to admit your vulnerabilities, be able to raise a hand and say, actually, you know what, I don't know the next step, I don't know the way forward, I don't know, here is this challenge in front of me and I don't know how to address this. Because the moment we share that vulnerability, and especially from the senior leadership team, even from the board, right, and we have that connection with employees, people will care, people will step up, they will want to help, they will want to contribute, they will want to solve those problems. And most of the time we have all the resources and all the answers already within the organization.
Yes.
But we fail to ask the right questions. We fail to show up vulnerably, authentically, and saying that, this is the direction where we're going, these are the uncertainties we are facing, these are the difficulties that we have to meet along the way, right? And without that transparency, of course, it becomes just the next thing on your to-do list, and people leave, and people don't want to be part of that anymore.
Yeah. My first job was on the shop floor of an engineering company when I think I was 15, and seeing the managing director, he used to walk the shop floor every day, and he knew what was going on. He knew what was going on, and there's an innate wisdom in just cutting across all the management streams and just talking. If there's a problem, so often the people who are actually have they're touching the problem and are very often at the bottom end of the management structure. They know the answer. They know the answer. But by the time it gets up to the C-suite, or indeed the board, it's been filtered so much. And I think, members of a board arranging and not having it sort of prepared. I always remember when I was in the service, whenever the Queen came to visit, everything was painted and everything was prepared. It's like she never saw anything that looked scruffy. But nevertheless, just talking to the people made such an enormous difference. And she did have insights into what was going on, however much she was protected. And when you get a board member who has sort of a high frequency responsibility, just walking amongst some of the people lower down in the organization is such an education if they go to listen.
Yeah.
Listen. We talked about transparency. How about listening as well?
Yeah.
We don't listen enough. And if you've got a group of executives together and you ask them, how good a listener are you? Statistically, they overrate themselves enormously. Listening is a skill, and we don't practice it enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think definitely. Thom, I could speak. I could speak to you for the rest of the day. There'd still be plenty of wisdom to to tap into. And I always enjoy our conversations. I think, to summarize, I think it's so important that those who are leading well-being and mental health initiatives actually understand where the board and C-suite are coming from with some of their pressures, some of their insecurities, some of their responsibilities, and that those at the top truly honestly listen and create systems for transparency in organizations so that there is culture of safety and trust where people can speak up, where people can manage upwards, when people can challenge things that doesn't work. And again, most importantly, that there is this overall sense of purpose and direction of where is this organization going and what is my role in this? What's the purpose of this business? How exactly it's adding value to the community, to people, to customers, to employees, to the world, to the environment, depending on your area of operations. And well-being is not just your shiny mindfulness app and gym membership, right? Well-being is ecosystemic. Well-being, it's how we feel about ourselves, our sense of purpose, our identity, what's our economic situation, what's our security of the future, how happy we are with ourselves, with our work, with our life, with the world, right? All of these aspects shape our well-being. And we fail to recognize the complexity of it, right? We kind of put the well-being as the shiny little thing on a shelf. And I think it's really the time that the board and the C-suite recognize the complexity of all of these factors that shape well-being. And then it will be much easier to incorporate some of those factors into your long-term strategy, into your long-term vision, into your operational plans, because then we know what truly makes the difference. And what we choose to measure will then shape our company's culture, ways of working, pressures and stresses and responsibilities. So yeah, I don't know if there is any kind of a final message or a takeaway that you'd like to share, Thom, for people who are listening.
Your summary is fantastic. You've covered pretty much everything that we've said. I think there is a piece about courage, and for people who are in organizations and are frustrated because you really care about the well-being of the people, and yet the decisions that are being made up top are just mitigating against that, which I think is quite a common thing. It calls for courage, and we talk about bullying and harassment, and the bystander effect, and how it really is up to everybody to when you see bad behavior, to call it out. And sometimes that can be jolly uncomfortable. Uh, and, I think of heads of HR who are just ricocheting from one sort of edict to the next, and they're genuinely trying to look after their people and create an environment where they feel safe and their mental health is being considered and all that, and they can't see how they can do it because of all these cutbacks and DEI is definitely under threat now. In lots of organizations it's being demoted because the bottom line is driving everything. And I think sometimes we've got to stand up. We've got to stand up and say, no, that's not okay. Or no. Learn how to say no in a creative and a positive way, but nevertheless, no. I, I, I remember working with a business years ago that was taken over by an American company. And the Americans came in and said, right, this is the way things are done around here. Because they were a global company. And the CEO in the UK said, no, we do it this way. And you let me do it this way, and we will be the most successful in your whole organization. And the Americans, having just spent a bunch of money, said, all right, prove it. And they did. And that CEO drove real positivity and real profit and a really successful business by holding out against, frankly, some bullies. But when he left, the next guy who came in started to kowtow and do what the Americans said, and that company went right down. Sometimes we've got to have the courage of our convictions and to really stand by what we feel is right in all respects. And I think that we are in a society where that is less and less the case now.
I love that. I love that message of a courage is such an important, aspect to take away, and being able to challenge when environment doesn't serve our values, our purpose, where it goes against our principles and beliefs. And yeah, we have to be brave to stand up against this kind of systemic injustices and kind of embedded, ingrained, outdated ways of working that no longer serve the purpose, right? And I think that's a wonderful message to end with. And for anyone who's listening and looking for any help and support with, setting their direction, working through their even personal challenges at the C-suite and all of these conflicting needs and demands and how to manage that, then I definitely cannot recommend Thom enough in providing that guidance and support. And also at Elite Mind, we do a lot of mining of people's needs and truth to create the insights that can really drive performance and productivity and so on. So for those courageous leaders who want to make a difference, who really want to live their values, live the truth, we feel free to reach out and explore how we can help and support you on that journey. So Thom, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your wisdom and your contribution, and I can't wait to continue conversation offline and for many more times that we can explore the shared synergy. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Evelina. Thank you.